Rave to the grave.
Welcome to Rave to the Grave. My guest today is Lisa Smith, better known on the scene as the uncompromising techno DJ and producer named Noncompliant. Lisa has been a fixture of the rave and electronic music culture in the Midwest for over 25 years. She started her DJ career under the name Shiva and has since played everywhere from cornfields and bingo halls to Boiler Room and the hallowed halls of Berlin's Berghain Club. Being an outspoken working-class butch lesbian techno head in the die-hard red state of Indiana hasn't always been easy, but Noncompliant has kept a stubborn devotion to a feminist, funky, sci-fi-influenced, and in-your-face brand of techno, one that's precipitated a second wave of popularity for her in her DJ career at the age of 45. In Noncompliant's music and her social media, she remains outspoken on the structural, political, economic, and gender issues facing the dance community and the world. And somehow, she keeps the faith in this rave culture that she's helped build one DJ set at a time. Plus, she's got an amazing memory and, of course, crazy-ass rave stories about phone tapping and busts, demonic clowns, and acid wormholes, and so much more. I hope you're ready to take the ride. Welcome to Rave to the Grave. Lisa, welcome to Rave to the Grave.
Woot. Hi.
Hi. There are a million and one reasons that I wanted to talk to you, but one of them is that I interviewed you for Red Bull Radio a couple years back, and you had some really amazing stories about driving to raves in the Midwest and what records you were listening to and seeing UFOs on the dance floor. And I just thought, God damn, she's the perfect guest for this show.
I have many stories.
I have the feeling that many people, even in the US, don't really know a whole lot about Indianapolis, also called Indy.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could kind of situate that for us in the US landscape and tell me a little bit about what it's like to live there.
Indy it's the capital, so it's the biggest city in the state. It's kind of like the crossroads. Like they call this state the crossroads anyway, but they also call it Naptown because it's where you take a nap on the way to Chicago. We have a lot of highways, big highways that spiral out from the city. So from here, within a 1.5 to 4 hour drive, you have Chicago, Ann Arbor, Kalamazoo, Detroit, Columbus, Cincy, Akron in Ohio. You've got Lexington and Louisville in Kentucky, which, yes, counts as the Midwest for these purposes. And then you've got like St. Louis, Madison, Wisconsin, getting a little further out. But I mean, literally, this was the amount of cities that there were where Indy was literally smack dab in the middle, equidistant from all of these places. So in the 90s, that meant not only could you get to anywhere that had a party going on within, 2 to 4 hours, you also were really in a great position to pull DJs from everywhere too. And especially, 3.5 hours from Chicago, 4 hours from Detroit. So we could get the cream of the crop here. So as far as living in Indy, it's cheap. It's super cheap. It's a horrendously red state. You all might know a guy by the name of Mike Pence. He's from here, so that tells you a lot. Yeah, it's a pretty conservative state. I mean, I'm from southern Indiana, which is even more conservative. But Indy's one of the little blue centers, and it's cheap. It's really cheap. So even when they try and gentrify it, it's like it was so cheap before that it's not that bad now.
if you talk about clubland now, you can't really imagine. I mean, there's only a couple centers in the US that people would go to go clubbing, but raving would really take you to quite literally the middle of nowhere, everywhere.
Yeah, because you didn't need a club. And I still, to this day, I miss that part because, well, I have opinions, shockingly, about, always placing, they always said, raves are drug dens, which, okay, I'm not going to lie that much. There was a lot there. But then if you take it out of that, you center it at clubs, which is all centered around alcohol. So please tell me the difference besides legality. But also they're profit-making centers. So it's harder for a club to take chances, especially now. But yeah, I love that you just needed a building, or maybe not a building, maybe just a cornfield or a barn. The thing that it's really funny trying to explain to Europeans is bingo halls. Because in the Midwest, bingo halls are just everywhere. And they're basically, in strip malls, usually, where there were a bunch of stores and maybe some big store like Sears or Kmart closed when all of those started closing. And suddenly it became a bingo hall where they could stick a bunch of tables and a bunch of people and just play bingo all day. But because they were so big, they made great venues. You could get those, or like dining halls or barns, whichever, or warehouses. But we didn't have as many warehouses here in Indy. Knights of Columbus halls, and I don't know how to explain those, really. Like Masons halls. They're like places where like older vets hang out. Because of the liquor laws in Indiana, a lot of states it's 18 and up, but here it's 21. For a lot of people, that just kept bars and clubs out of the scenario. What those kind of halls had was separate spaces for a bar that you didn't have to go through to be in the venue. There's a lot of stupid liquor laws how they set this up, but basically you could have an all ages rave in the big room and then have a separate bar for anyone who was over 21 who wanted to have a beer. It meant that we got a lot larger crowds, like a larger array of ages, which was great in some ways and terrible in others.
What is the great thing about an all ages party, and what was the terrible thing as it pertained to going to raves?
The great thing was just you had a lot of different people from a lot of walks of life. And when you've got younger kids who might be getting their hands on, drugs, it's always good to have some older people there who, can kind of guide them through it. I'm a big believer in harm reduction. People are going to try drugs. So if they're going to dabble, I would rather there be like older, more experienced people who are more responsible to make sure they're safe. But also because of that, I still have like friends of all ages. I have friends that are older than me. I have friends that are my age. I have friends that are like 20 years younger than me, and I think that's good. There were definitely predatory people in the scene, particularly older men who would prey on younger boys and girls. So there was a lot of that, and it was pretty gross.
Definitely.
There were definitely some promoters or DJs or just people in authority too, like not only because they were older, but because they had some, position of power in the scene or whatever. So there was definitely a lot of predatory behavior. And I don't think I recognized it enough when I was younger, because I was about, 24, 25 at the time. So now I look back, I'm like, oh my God. But I didn't really understand it as much at the time either.
Yeah, I don't know if we had like the language or the voice or the understanding back then to know what to say or to really know in that moment. Like you would know that it was yucky, but you didn't know in that moment what you should do about it, especially if the people being predatory were like older than you. While I think that raves are safe spaces in certain respects and kind of illegal parties and underground parties, they're also deeply unsafe spaces in other respects.
Yeah, exactly. I get so frustrated when people are like, but, this scene it's for everyone, it's a safe space where you can go. Raves were safe back then. I'm like, for you, maybe, if you weren't, a 16-year-old kid who shows up and there's all these people older than them who they're like, oh my gosh, you throw parties, or oh my gosh, you're a DJ, like it wasn't safe for them.
In terms of the parts of it that were a safe space, like for me, it was like the opposite of what going to a club would have been at that time. There wasn't a dress code. There weren't cheesy bros. It wasn't like the jocks from my high school. You could be whoever you wanted. You could look super freaky. You could be any identity that you wanted to be. And for me, it was a safe space in that regard where I wasn't being bullied, made fun of, harassed, and I could just like whatever I liked and look however I liked and not have to really conform.
Looking back now, I'm like, did we maybe expose some of these younger people to some things they shouldn't have been exposed to? Yeah, probably. But, if they hadn't had that, where would they have been? Like I know people who were into some really gnarly stuff and then they found raves and they found a community. The rules of that community mattered, so there was some behavior that just wasn't going to fly. So if I hadn't had that, if I hadn't had punk rock and skateboarding and raves, who knows, man, I was a hellion. But yeah, having some place to focus that all that energy kept me from, getting in worse trouble. So
what was your sort of intro into electronic music and raves in that iteration that we've been talking about?
We had a college radio station called WUEV. It's University of Evansville's radio station. And they played all kinds of stuff: punk rock, folk, electronic, industrial, whatever. I think I heard Lords of Acid, Let's Get High and Have Fun. And then I remember hearing Radioactive Goldfish, which it's somebody's pseudonym, I think like DJ Magic Mike or something.
That's one of the first techno records I ever heard. One in the first three. Yeah, LSD is the bomb.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly it. And and I started like looking for, just all I knew was like, I called the station. I like literally pulled over my car. I was on my way home, pulled over my car, went to a payphone and called the radio station and was like, what the hell is this? Please tell me. And yeah, that one was Radioactive Goldfish. I just liked anything that sounded unnatural. Just the inorganic, unnatural, possibly like machinery breaking. Loved it. So like to me it was like, oh, this is like the same stuff they used to make industrial, but without the stupid ass lyrics. We just had places that sold tapes and CDs. We didn't have a record store of any kind. We had to drive 2 hours to Louisville to get like punk rock mags and 7-inch records and all that. We went to Better Days in Louisville. That was always our first stop. I don't know if I asked somebody at the store or what, but I ended up at the Rave section. I think I kind of knew what those were, but not really. So I started buying CDs. And then my buddy at this little DIY club that he ran called the Spiritual Gear, I was carrying a CD case after a show and like was looking through it, and he had like Rave Till Dawn and Orbital, and I was like, oh my God, you listen to this music too? So then we realized, oh, we've got a space. So we started throwing raves. Those on the air will not hear the funny ears I did around raves, because they didn't resemble anything you would probably think of as a rave. It was just like 20 people in this like loft of this pool hall, a strobe light, some like plastic hung from the rafters so the strobe light could bounce off of it, and literally 2 CD players, not decks, players, hooked up to a giant mixing board, which is how I learned to mix, by the way. Just, pull the channel down, push the channel up. So I DJ'd for years with no pitch control. I got really creative, though. That was a cool thing. But yeah, so that's how we threw our first rave. And then it would be punk rock shows on Friday, raves on Saturday. And it would be literally all of the weirdos. Like I went up to Indy one time. Indy's about 3.5, 4 hours from my hometown. And I came up here and went shopping at some other stores and found some more CDs. Occasionally I would like find something like, what was that one compilation? Trans Europe Express, I think it was. It came with a book. And, that's where I first heard of like Sven Väth and, all the German techno stuff. But like it came with this thick ass book, CD cover size, and it would tell you all about the artists. And I remember I learned about like the Rave Criminalization Act they had in the UK. I learned so much from those little books. So yeah, that's how I found a lot.
It was sort of like trying to piece together. Some of those people were from all different genres, but it was just like, that's who they could get to be on the compilation, or that's who they could, there weren't as many producers and genres and DJs as there are now. So they were like, yeah, sure, this is trance. Like, we're just going to call this trance for the purposes of the compilation. And then you look back at it and you're like, actually isn't trance at all, but okay.
Some of it at that time was kind of on the border, like especially in Germany. There was a lot of the hard German trance that kind of, you could play it in a techno set. Nobody would know the difference really. But yeah, the genres weren't really so set. You just had to like do whatever research you could. A lot of word of mouth. Have you ever heard of this? Do you listen to this stuff? Cool, we're friends. And then like you could benefit from their research as well if you couldn't find things.
Yeah, in a sense, we were all doing our homework all the time because you were just trying to find out some information wherever you could get it. But you guys, so you guys were throwing this rave without actually having really been to raves per se. What came first? Did you get turntables first and go that route? Or did you start going to like, quote unquote, real raves?
Start going to real raves. None of us really knew that turntables were a thing necessarily. It was just, we knew this music was supposed to be mashed together in some shape or form, but we didn't know how. Like we would get like Speed Limit, a lot of those were mixed. And so I was like, oh, this is really cool. But I had no clue about how to do that. Pitch control, I don't know what the hell pitch control is. I'll just, make sure that 2 beats line up and then I'll slam that fader over. Everything's great. And no one cared either. That was the thing. And because of that, you could play stuff that wasn't electronic music too. We would always end the night with Dead Can Dance at that club. So that was like our cool down record. But no, I didn't find out about those really until I went to my first rave, which was April 3rd or 4th, 1992. Because the day before, there was a rave in Indy that was literally just called Acid. And I really wanted to go to it. I was still living in Evansville at the time, but I couldn't. So we went to one the next night. And that one, Terry Mullen just showed up randomly and ended up playing. He wasn't on the bill. I didn't know who anybody was. You didn't know who anybody was. It's just a bunch of names on a flyer. Okay, I'll go to that. It's a rave. Cool. And he showed up and I was like, whatever this insane, squadgy, squishy music is, I want to play that. Like it was perfect. So after that was when like I started to see people DJ. Like at that party, you couldn't see anything. It was just lasers, lights, fog, didn't know what was going on. Loved it. Had no idea what was going on. But I finally saw somebody DJ. I was like, oh, I have no idea what they're doing, but that's really cool. So, but I was like, but you know what? If I start buying records, I'm never going to stop. Also, it wasn't easy to get records in Evansville at all. But I also knew, man, if I start this habit, it's the rabbit hole. And, well, that was true.
The cost of buying turntables and records was prohibitive even back then. I mean, you definitely had to like work at something or have an inheritance or something. You had to have something, some way of getting the money.
I used plastic turntables that we got from garage sales for years. I never had a Technics turntable. I don't think I got my first Technics until after I moved to Indy. It was a couple of years after I'd been here. So it had to have been 97 or 98. So I would spend at gigs. I started in 95 on plastic, like literally $25, Sears turntable. Played on those for like 3.5 years. And I could rock those things like nobody else, but it had a little dial for the pitch. And then if you put your hand on the platter, it just stopped. We're talking like plastic tone arms that if you put your hand on the record, it would bounce. So I learned how to cue from the side of the record so it wouldn't bounce the needle. But yeah, but it was prohibitive. That's why it took me years to save money for one technique. So I had one Technique 1200 and then a Sears turntable. But records, man, so expensive. You know what was rad about that though? Made us picky. I would listen. There's a few guys who would really roll their eyes if they heard me say this right now, but I had a hold pile of epic proportions.
At the record store?
Oh God, yes. But that was the thing is I would come in, I would listen to like 50, 100 records and buy 2. And part of that was because I was broke. Always. If you're broke, you're going to spend like $20, $25 on 2 records. They have to be the best records you found out of that 100. And it made us like only pick rad tunes. I mean, it's nice to have like pretty much every piece of music at your fingertips right now. That's rad. I can record shop in my underwear on the couch. Super. Love it. But like I've kind of got a rule for myself because it's too easy.
What are the rules? I need to know this because I was opining the other day that like I miss going to the record store and I miss having this fixed crate, and it's like sometimes the experience of getting music now is just like it can feel really like devalued at times when you just have this USB stick where you're like, okay, it's like 1,000 things on here. But how do I feel about any of it sometimes on a bad day? So what are your rules? I need to know.
So shopping and promos, because you definitely with promos have to be pretty finicky as well. I've only got so much hard drive. Basically, it's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, have I heard this before? Meaning, have I heard a song that's similar to this one? Similar sound, similar groove, whatever. Okay, if no, move to step 3. If yes, move to step 2. And step 2 is, if you've heard this before, is this giving anything new to it? You know, does it sound better? Does it have just a super dope groove, even if you've heard like that particular stab? You know, if it's a Jackie thing, you know, those are a dime a dozen, but does it just make you want to move your ass anyway, regardless of whether you've heard it before? Okay, cool. Yes, keep it, move to number 3. No, ditch it. Number 3, does it move your ass? Does this give you something new in any way, shape, or form that you feel you can add to this, you know, this palette of sounds that you have? You know, because there is a lot of samey sounding techno, and, you know, I play a lot of like tools, and people hate the term functional. I don't mind it at all. You know, functional things that bridge gaps and that pull, you know, 2 records together, having a layer on top of it. You know, does it add something? Can you do something with this? If you drop this, would people's brains melt? And if it passes the brain melt category, you're good. Like, I don't like to forfeit the funk. I think that's missing in a lot of techno right now. Like, it's okay to bash your head in. That's cool. I have fun with that too, where you're like, you know, up against a speaker, like fucking bang in your head. Sure, that's fun. But for like 15 minutes, like, don't just stay there. It's got to have some funk somewhere. I have an ass. I have to shake it. You know, if it's all just people jumping up and down, you know, you got to see some booty moving. Everything has to be layered all the time. I would rather be in the mix than out of it. I don't like to let songs play for very long. So.
Yeah, you said something in another interview where you were saying about playing at raves and you only got like an hour and a half. So you really had to get in there. And in a sense, every set was peak time at a rave because the rave only lasted so long. So you had to bang it out for that hour and a half that you got and just come as like hard or crazy or banging or jacking or whatever as you needed to come to make an impression. So now in the days of clubs and like building up sets and playing these like 4-hour, 8-hour sets, it's a little bit of a different thing coming from that mentality. And like that really resonated with me because I feel the same way. Like I'm just used to playing that short set of the bangers.
And also as a punk rocker, I was like, yeah, just boom, say what you got to say, get it done. I think I remember that interview actually. I called it Forged in the Battle of the Clock. That's all you had. You had an hour, put up or shut up. And it was a little bit competitive too. It was a lot competitive. There were so many DJs. I think my favorite length of time for a set is about 3 to 4 hours. At that point, I feel like I've said what I have to say. I don't need to belabor the point, you know? So I actually was supposed to do, it didn't happen because I got sick. I got pleurisy, so I didn't get to do that. But I was supposed to do a back-to-back closing at Berghain, which I'm still very sad that I missed.
With who?
My buddy Kyle Geiger. I told them, I was like, I actually don't want to do an 8-hour set. Plus, I mean, physically, if you're standing for 8 hours, then it's literally a job. I didn't get into to have a job. Like this is the opposite of job, even when I'm working. But then I was like, well, but how do you say no to that? That's an honor. So I split the difference. But yeah, I'm just like, it was a different thing though, going from that hour set into the longer set. And I'm not one of those people who's like, I want to play 80 records in an hour. When it's supposed to be mixed out is when it happens. But I had to slow that a little bit when the sets started getting longer. So I was like, you just can't energetically keep up that pace or you will just wear yourself out. So I had to learn to just like, get your hand off the mixer for a minute, have a drink, come back. You can mix out 30 seconds later. It'll be okay. So.
I always feel like house and techno DJs have it a lot luckier because what's happening in my realm of like club music and bass music, the tracks keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So you don't have like your Ricardo Villalobos moment where you can like do a bump of K and get lost for 10 minutes and the record is still playing. Like you really like, I have all these songs that are like 3 minutes and 2 minutes and you have to keep your hands on the mixer. Otherwise it's expired.
And I remember like early dubstep would just be like, here's a little floaty synth riff. And then boom, the bass drops with the beat. And I was like, what? I can't, what? How do you mix this? That always drove me nuts. I would actually throw loops over it and like mix it anyway. I played it all like techno.
Well, that's smart because a lot of those DJs just turned into techno DJs. So
they sure did, like Cosmin TRG and Ramadan Man, Pearson Sound, Scuba, all those guys.
Okay, so you mentioned Kyle Geiger, and one of the crazy and amazing things about the Midwest is that you guys were such a family that were all driving around from these different places to Chicago, to Detroit, to, a field in the middle of nowhere. Who are some of the people that have been around you and been your friends that are also like DJs, producers, etc. since, I don't know, 94, 95 and those days?
Oh, wow. So Kyle, he was kind of later. He came into it a little later. He's a little younger than I am. I don't know if I should tell everyone his old DJ name. It was DJ Aslan. But like Adam J for sure. He's like my brother, basically. Maria, for sure. The Blessed Madonna. I bought mixtapes off of her and crashed on one of her hotel floors in Detroit for one of the movements some year. There was a lot of that going on, too. Just crash on somebody's floor, in the car, in the van, whatever.
Okay, so let's talk about Maria, because you guys have been really good friends for a long time now. Formerly known as the Black Madonna, currently known as the Blessed Madonna.
Also known as Lady Foursquare. Trivia.
Take me back a little bit. How did you guys meet initially? And what mixtapes were you buying off her?
This was at a party in Vincennes, Indiana. It was at a gun club. No lie. It was thrown by Sin Productions, and I remember David Hollins played at it. She was back in the back selling mixtapes. It was called J Squared at the time. Now it's Untranslatable Concepts. It was just a mixtape booth, and I didn't have any tapes. All I had were those CDs, so I went back there, and that's really where people really got introduced to mixes too. You know, you could buy those commercially made CDs, but until you had a mixtape, you just really weren't living. Yeah, it was Roughneck, DJ Roughneck, and it was like this UK hardcore mix. I had no idea what I was looking for, and she asked me what I liked. I was like, "Oh, I'm really into like the Speed Limit series." She's like, "Okay, this one," you know. So, and it was rad, and that tape lasted until my friend had a car wreck and rolled his car, and it flipped out the window. So, goodbye, first.
Well, that's a good dramatic death of the mixtape.
It's a better death than just unraveling in the cassette player. But yeah, and then I would just see her everywhere. She was always at parties, selling mixtapes, dancing, always dancing. I found out that she had finally started a DJ, and I was like, well, it's about damn time. I went to see her. I think it was a party in Columbus. And she played pretty, like Jack and House. I like House too. I love Chicago House. She got up there, started whacking double copies, whacking that fader around it. And you know what? People made that a big meme. And it's so funny because they put the wrong music behind it. Everybody saw that and was like, oh, this DJ's terrible, but it wasn't the music she was playing. She actually knows how to do double copy tricks. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, it's you put the same song on both decks, and then you like kind of scratch the one off time so it kind of hits a second behind the beat. So you can kind of do these really cool echo tricks with it. And I hadn't seen that many women on the decks. I mean, there were a few, but they were from all over the place. There weren't any others at the time in my city. There were very few. The only other one I really knew was Devil Girl from St. Louis. We were very rare. And so when she finally started playing, and then she gets up there and starts whacking the fader around and like really just skills, pure skills. I was running around the floor just going, motherfucking fearless! Bitch is fearless! I was just running around saying that because I was so stoked. But yeah, so it was a good start. And she made the most of it.
Yeah, she did good. I'm still of the opinion that we played a party together way back in the day, although I can't find the flyer, but I feel like maybe we played for Elemental out of Columbus. But like you said, I mean, every time you'd like hear of another like female DJ, you'd be like, oh, because there just weren't that many. You were kind of like, oh, I heard of there's somebody that lives there that's also doing it.
That's how I met my best friend, was a Columbus party where he actually booked, it was Elemental, and he booked like 2 or 3 other women. Specifically, I found out later because he wanted us all to meet. But I ended up meeting her, and she played drum and bass. And I was like, oh, so do I. I didn't bring those records with me, but one of the other DJs like couldn't make it for some reason. And so we're like, why don't we just suggest that we do a tag team set? She would just hand me records out of her crate, and I would just mix them. If you do a tag team set with somebody, there's a lot of trust involved there. And so like we just clicked like that, and instantly I was just like, she'll give me the right records, it's all good. And we're still friends. That was in 97, 98 maybe.
We kind of touched on it a little bit here and there, but I always felt like the Midwest, you guys had a little bit of a different musical palette. Can you talk a little bit about sounds that you were hearing from these different places like Chicago, Detroit? To me, there was a heady dose of kind of hard acid that I always associated with the Midwest.
Being equidistant from Chicago and Detroit. And yeah, you had the acid coming from like Woody McBride and the drop bass folks. And then you also had drum and bass really started to hit Chicago, like 3D, Phantom 45, Danny the Wild Child. The infamous Jungle Book mixtape set came out. That was awesome. So we had a good influx of drum and bass here too. I love drum and bass, so I was pretty stoked about that. So that was really the bread and butter, house, techno, and drum and bass, really. Keep in mind too, I speak only from my experience, which in a lot of ways, I have this interesting level of isolation from like A, the coasts, and B, the rest of the world. India is its own planet. If I want to go hear techno, I pretty much have to play it, or some of my friends do. Terry Matthew from 5 Mag wrote a great article about this, and I'm so glad he did, where he talked about the middle class DJs. Like, you still had your big names that people knew. You would always want to get your big headliner. And then you'd have some locals, of course. But in the Midwest, there existed the middle class DJs, and they were people like me who could travel all around the Midwest. I wasn't a headliner, but I wasn't a local either. You know, you weren't charging like a buttload of money, you know, a couple $100 maybe, you know, $100 to $500. But you could make a decent living. And I worked part-time, and then I would travel around. And, you know, there was actually a place for you. And now, because the DJ fees are so elevated, now they blow so much money on the headliner, there's nothing left. They get locals, or they get people who are desperate and willing to play for very little. You know, the headliner sucked all the air out of the room. I would like there to be that level again. A lot of it was they were working people too. It was like, you know, I can do weekends, but I can't like necessarily tour all the time. So it was nice to have that tier there, and people could still make a little money to mostly pay for records.
So the first party that you ever played, back to the cornfield for a minute, was in a cornfield, right? I mean, the first rave.
Nope.
The first one
That was the one I ever headlined. The first rave I ever played was Nocturna, which was a bi-weekly thing here in Indianapolis. Well, that was the first like regular thing. I think the first rave I ever played was in Louisville, maybe. I don't even remember the name of it, but I think Project 7 probably had something to do. Yeah, that's where I met James Blair, who was the best sound guy, one of the best sound guys in the Midwest. But the first headlining party was Kicking in the Corn, and it was in a barn in Angola, Indiana, which is up near like Fort Wayne. It's almost to the border of Michigan. And it was fun and cold. Barn parties are great, except for the lack of facilities.
So there's no bathroom in the barn, is what you're saying.
No, you piss in the field. So this guy Wes, who DJ'd under Locutus, at one point, like, they didn't even have monitors. I made them turn like a stack toward me. So it's a very loud situation. But at one point, Wes comes back to me. He's like, check this out. This is awesome. And then he walks to the middle of the floor and he just still starts, woo! And he could get the whole room to do it. So every time like a really good part of a song happened, he would, woo! And then the whole room would just explode. And he was just like, I've got them in my hands, man. But he was like the best cheerleader ever. It's like my techno cheerleader. We had a lot of fun.
I mean, that was always what's great about rolling with a carload of people, is like, regardless of what the party is like, at least you have a whole squadron to like make it fun or cause trouble or make jokes or do dumb stuff. And I think kids still get it out of going to festivals with all their friends. But now that it's like very club oriented, you're usually just like kind of going to the club and maybe you'll see your friends there or whatever. But that whole time when you're like in the car on the way to the rave, and then you stop at the Cheese Castle and you listen to the mixtapes, and
that's where you got to know
the whole
people.
Journey part is sort of not there anymore, it seems, or not for me anyway.
The road trip was everything. You know, you don't really get to know people at a party. You got to know them in the car on the way there, or, you know, on the way back when like 3 people are like rolling balls and one person is tripping and you're trying to drive, and you could be sober mostly. But, you know, and they're like, you know, one person's like freaking out, please take that tape out, please take that tape out. And then like 2 people are making out in the back seat. And, you know, it's just absolute chaos. That's also when you find out who you really want to be in a car with. You know? So that really is where you got to know people.
So what year was this that you played at Kickin' in the Corn?
97 or 98. ish.
And if we would have heard you play back then, who would you have been playing in your set?
Oh, like Joey Beltram for sure. The Advent, Rob Hood, Jeff Mills, Kari Leckebusch. I loved Leckebusch. Yeah, that was pretty much my go-tos there. Was the Swedes, Kari, Adam Bear, Joel Mull, Christian Smith, bunch of Detroit stuff. I had a bunch of like Octave. Why is my brain dying? Octave 1. Oh, and DJ Hyperactive too. His stuff was rad.
So kind of hard driving techno from this Detroit and European axis.
Yeah, definitely. Like it had to have a little bit of an edge to it, but it actually, it still needed that funk underneath it, or that bump. Funk, bump, either one of those is fine. They are two different things. If I had to explain it, it would be hilarious. I mean, funk is like funk. That's the stuff that makes you like not only shake your ass, but like make that face like, oh, that's nasty. It's got to make you do the nasty face. And then bump is like, that kind of makes you just like bap your head. And you're just like, yeah, that's more energy. Bump is energy. Funk is dirt. Stank. That's funk. I didn't have any particular dance style aside from shaking butt, waving fist in air, punching. There was a lot of punching. Some people have found that out the hard way. I don't need to dance in a particular way. I just want to stick my face in the speaker. That's another thing about the Midwest that like some places that clubs definitely don't have. Clubs, I implore you, more giant speaker stacks that I can stick my face in, please. Like, I don't want it flown. I don't like it flown. Putting your head in the speaker is just a complete zone out scenario. And please always wear your earplugs. Keep the time in front of a speaker short because I'm an old lady and I want to take care of all you little raver ears. But just being able to stare at a speaker and not even be aware of a dance floor behind you at all is the most beautiful thing. You're just right there in the speaker. You are one with the music. You can't see anything. Nobody else is there. Just you and the music. Speaker freakers. Speaker freaking is the best.
Okay, let's get to even more rave stories. So tell me about some of the best parties that you've ever been to in your life.
Okay. So one of them was here in Indy. I didn't live here at the time. This had to have been 95. It was the first party I ever, big party that I ever got guest list for. And it had, Mike Dearborn, Trax. I forget who else, because to me, the only people that mattered to this day were Mike Dearborn and Trax. And that's not an insult to anybody else who played there, but those were the ones who melted my brain. It was at this space in Indy, Raymond and Shelby. Anyone from Indy will know that. Because it was this big hall that had a smaller room with skate ramps in the back. So we drove up. I was always running around in Evansville. I had no money. I was always like, who wants to go to the rave? And nobody wants to go. And I'm like, that was the thing, is I couldn't afford to do it by myself. So I would always offer guest lists for gas money. So we came up and I was young and I ate acid and I ended up dancing in front of a speaker while Mike Dearborn was playing acid. And then the mid-range speaker became a portal into other worlds. And I got kind of sucked into that for a while. And it was great. I never stopped moving my ass, but I was definitely portulated. That's not a real word. Portulated into a new world. And so good. It was so fun. I kind of miss those days because it's very rare that it happens anymore. But that was one of those where you're not even really conscious of moving your body. And I didn't have to be in a hallucinogenic mood to feel this, but it certainly helped. Where you just don't even feel your body anymore. Your body's just moving. The music is holding you up, basically. And it was just that good. And then later, early morning, Trax was playing in the back. And this is when he played super booty moving Chicago house, proper Chicago house. And by the time I get back in that room, the room is already sweating. Water condensation is pouring off the ceiling. Everybody's sweating. The room is sweating. He is just jacking it out. And it was one of those times where like the DJ is putting out all this energy, but the crowd is feeding it right back to him. And you can literally see the energy through the room. None of us could stop dancing. The sound system had been blown hours ago. The lights were on, like the overhead lights were on. There weren't any fancy lights. It was just a room with fluorescents and some skate ramps and some blown speakers. And wow. And at one point, he like did that trick with the little thread spindle where you can put the record upside down and turn the needle and like played the record backwards. No, you know what? He didn't even get that fancy, did he? He just did it with his finger. Yeah, it all melts together after a while. But no, he was spinning it backwards with his finger, and then he dropped an a cappella of Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, over top of it while going backwards with his finger. He was just making his own remix. And we all lost our freaking minds, completely just melted that room down because I had just started DJing. And I told him that, and I was like, I think I could lock myself in a room for 12 years with a set of turntables and some records, and I would still never be able to do that. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, you will. And that was that. But yeah, that was pretty darn amazing. The other one that I have to talk about is Interstellar Dreamfest, though. This was 99. It was a combo. There was like a party called Dreamfest, which I had also played at. And there was another one called Interstellar Outback. And this was the two promoters doing a big party. It was in Illinois, out in the middle of nowhere. Richie Houghton was the big headliner. It was like Richie Houghton, Acid Pimp, Odie. Who else was there? There was just a ton of DJs. But there was like Massive had a tent back in the woods, which was crazy. You had to walk through the woods to get to it. And then you got there and it's literally like a circus tent with an evil clown. And it says, how could hell be any worse? And it was like hard drum and bass and hardcore all weekend.
This is Massive Magazine from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yes, from Milwaukee. Yeah, I think it was probably obviously some of the drop bass guys too, but that place was crazy. But there was a big system, one of the biggest systems I'd gotten to play on at the time, one of the biggest crowds I'd played in front of before. But my favorite part about this party is, so the camping is out a ways out, and it's in like this little horseshoe from the entry, right? So to get you from your tent to the party, there was a tractor with a flatbed. And he would stop off at a couple of spots and you'd jump on the flatbed and then just continue to go. So the real fun of the weekend was the flatbed, because you'd get on the flatbed, your legs hanging down. It was terribly unsafe. And as you would roll along, people would wave, and then everybody on the flatbed would wave, and it just became a thing. At one point, I'm standing on the the fender of the tractor, holding onto the light bar, waving like a princess. Yeah, it was completely nuts. But what also happened at that one is, I got to play, which was awesome. While I was playing, I look up and it's like a circus freak show has come into town. There's fire and acrobats and all kinds of madness happening. And it was this group called the People's Republic of Delicious Food that would go around and perform at parties. Richie played for, I think, this is Richie back in the Dex Effects in 909 era. 3 decks, hard techno, none of this bloopity shit. I do love some bloopity shit, but just no leaky sink shit, I should say. And at one point, I don't know why this happened. There's this guy who went by Chef who had been making food all weekend, who walks around and starts handing us broccoli. And so at one point, we're like throwing broccoli into the crowd. There's one point where Richie was playing and my buddy Adam is there. I'm like shaking his arm. I'm like, Adam, what's this track? And he's like, he just real chill, just looks at me and goes, you have this track, Lisa. And I'm like, oh, I do. What's he doing to this track? Because he was throwing effects over top of it and it was rad. So it's a good party.
Peak Richie. So were you camping out? You keep saying all weekend. You were camped out there?
We didn't camp out because I'm a delicate flower. Also whiny. So I do not like camping at all. No, we had a room for that one, and it was like me, Adam J, and Gizmo. And there are some pretty hilarious pictures of us waking Gizmo up by beating him with pillows.
As much as obviously we were all in love with the music, in love with dancing, in love with the whole thing, it was also like the ridiculousness that kept you just like coming back for more. You're like, what is going to happen this weekend? Like what crazy like misadventures or adventures.
And then you had you talked about adventures, man. You had the busts. That was the big one that you don't have with club culture, is you had the busts. Even if you had all your ducks in a row, even if you had all your permits and were doing it legally, it didn't matter. They didn't want us doing those. And so half the time, especially if you were going to Chicago, because everything was getting busted at that point in time, like 98, 99. Yeah, you could drive for 3-4 hours and then show up and there's no party at all. So then you're either screwed, which I've had that scenario happen, because you don't have a place to stay, or your car broke down an hour outside of Chicago. That's a story. Or you find the after party. And sometimes the after parties would be pretty raging. We ended up, this was in St. Louis, we ended up in a loft, Astro Boy's loft. I heard tracks on, the speaker system was literally a bass amplifier on a counter. That was one of the most mental parties I was ever at. And then we got lost on the way back home, which was entirely my fault. So we ended up in southeastern Indiana instead of southwestern Indiana, which is an additional 2 hours. So yeah, always an adventure.
What do you consider to be one of the worst or weirdest or most chaotic rave situations that you've been in?
Lady Bust. It was a party called Ladybug 2 in Chicago, but if you say Lady Bust, everybody will know what you're talking about if they were there. Huge party. I think that one had Lady Miss Kier and some of the Delight people, and I knew the person throwing the party, which was weird because I didn't know anybody in Chicago. So I rolled up. I got a bunch of my friends, 5 of us. The car broke down an hour outside of Chicago. So we took a taxi an hour into Chicago, which you can imagine costs a pretty penny. And there were only, I think, 2 of us who actually had any money. When we roll up into the parking lot, the taxi driver drops us off, and then we find out the party got busted. Everyone just chilling. I'm like, oh, crap. This is also before cell phones. All of a sudden, the parking lot gets swarmed with CPD. And we're like, oh, shit. And they're like, if you don't leave now, you're going to be arrested. And we're like, oh my God, we have no way to leave. And this kid just walks up to us and is like, get in the van. We pile into this van that's already got 8 people in it. We add 5 more, and they got us out of there. They were, I think, from Pennsylvania, maybe, or Ohio. I can't remember. But so we're just drop us off at a hotel. So we got a hotel room. The promoter lives across the border. He lives in northern Indiana. So his phone is northern Indiana. I'm in Chicago. At the time, that's long distance. So it wasn't just 1 quarter. It was 8 quarters a pop. Calling and calling and calling, getting his voicemail. We didn't have enough money for food. At some point, there were bread, butter, and Captain Crunch sandwiches being made. But we were there for 2 or 3 days. And finally, I get a hold of the dude, and he moves us to a hotel closer to him, which is incidentally closer to our car. So he comes and gets us, moves us to that hotel, pays for it. Because he invited me up there, got me guest lists, and then we were stranded for 3 days. So he's like, I've got the hotel. It's cool. And then one friend calls her uncle, now that we have phone access, calls her uncle, who drives up to northern Indiana in an RV with a trailer, picks us up, gets the car, and we drove. It's 8 hours from Evansville to Chicago. That's the length of Indiana. So we're in an RV for 8 hours, totally cracked out, have barely slept.
With somebody's uncle.
With somebody's uncle, yeah. And there's a bunch of us ravers cracked out in the back, laying on the bed in the back, watching the car out the window, talking shit. you know? Spend my entire paycheck on like the hotel and the phones and the taxi ride. It was completely bonkers, man. And you never knew where you were going to end up. I went one weekend, I drove up to Indy, then drove over to Ohio for the first family affair. It was an outdoor camp out rave with Dub Tribe. I think I went to a Friday rave, like a Nocturna or something in Indy, and was going to go home. And then somebody was like, let's go to Ohio. And I'm like, okay. And so we go there. I have literally only the clothes on my back and no money. It gets really cold. It's like July and it gets super cold. So I end up like sleeping in front of a campfire and like turning over every couple of minutes to toast the other side, And oh yeah, this is another thing I love about raves, that party. I have a thing, and I would recommend this to every raver. The first time you go to the bathroom and there's still toilet paper, wrap some up and put it in your pocket because you're going to need it later. So I did that. And I walked out of the porta potty, and this girl goes in behind me, and I hear this wail, no, because I had taken the last of the toilet paper. She comes out looking really dejected, and I just walked up to her and was just like, here's my emergency stash. And she's like, I will find you and I will pay you back. So hours later, I'm sitting in a lawn chair in the back of somebody's truck, just chilling, and this car rolls up. This girl gets out, same girl from the bathroom, with a double armload of toilet paper, runs up to me, hands it to me, hugs me, says, thank you, and runs off. Still don't know who she was. But we had toilet paper for the rest of the weekend, and that at a camp out rave, that's critical. So, but that, and then we went back to Indy, and somebody's like, let's go to Chicago and see the fireworks. So we did. Went to Chicago, saw the fireworks, came back to Indy, hadn't slept yet. Oh, there's a Sunday party. Oh, well, we'll go to that then. That was a crazy weekend.
You would come home and you'd just be like covered in dirt or something or anything. I don't know, whatever, because you sat on the floor. I mean, like, just like wearing like a string bikini to these parties would not have been an option.
No, it would have been very uncomfortable. You wanted to be comfortable because you were probably going to sweat, but especially in the Midwest, you were also then going to get cold. I do miss big pants. Big pants were cute. They were hilarious. All the little ravers looked like they were floating on their pants. I always thought that was hilarious because if they didn't go over their shoes, they weren't big enough. So everyone looked like they were just gliding, little gliding ravers. And yeah, and it was very like, I also liked that it was kind of androgynous too. Like the girls all wore big pants. I mean, some would wear like half tops or whatever, but like, still they'd have a giant oversized hoodie to throw on over the top of it, and a lot of them had short hair, so like, and a visor, so it was androgynous, and I kind of enjoyed that. Kudos to anyone. Women should be able to wear whatever the fuck they want, but it was nice in that it felt a little bit desexualized, which was kind of okay. It was nice to kind of have that area.
Yeah, I think that at the time I felt like it was very refreshing to me to just feel like I was being judged on my DJ skills or my personality, as corny as that is to say, or whatever, rather than, what I was wearing or like this image that I was needing to put forth as a woman or whatever. And like DJ culture has gone up and down with that for sure. But that time felt very liberating to me because I was just dressed like in these baggy clothes, and it wasn't about the clothes, wasn't
right.
about the look. It was just like, could you throw down on the decks or not?
Or did you have good dance moves too?
Yeah,
like for people who weren't DJs, it was, can you dance? Are you having fun? Are you contributing something awesome? That was always, it was just rad to just be respected for that. And I like baggy clothes anyway because I came from skateboarding, so I was like, yes, this is so my jam. Still is.
Yeah,
it's just harder to get them baggier on me anymore. So I filled in the bagginess.
Yeah, now when I wear baggy clothes, it just doesn't look quite the same as it did when I was a skinny. So, I mean, how do you feel like being involved in rave culture or electronic music shaped your identity or your ethic?
I think what was awesome about it, like, because sort of my DIY, do-it-yourself mentality came from punk rock and felt right at home in the rave scene. And that's another thing I love about it as opposed to clubs, is it was very do-it-yourself and with varying degrees of success, of course. And it was a little less like gur arg than punk rock. I mean, I'm pretty gur arg anyway, but it was less judgy in a lot of ways. You know, there was a lot less sort of, like, one of my least favorite words in the punk skater lexicon is poser, because I think that's a word that like 13-year-old boys say to keep other people from doing things they want to do. You know, what makes you a poser? Like, oh, am I not wearing the right clothes? Am I not like listening to the right bands? Like, what's that even about? It's just a stupid gatekeeper word. And I'm always just, fuck you, whatever. There was a lot of that in there. There was still stuff, you know, there were still cliques. There were still, you know, things that are cool and things that are not cool. But it was less policed, I felt, you know? I mean, you know, sure, there were some people who were definitely had the like fashion plate ravers who had all the good brands. You know, they had their like Nautica hoodie and their like Jinko jeans, and, you know, they had all the right money to buy the stuff. But I didn't feel like I hung out with those people, and that wasn't me. You know, I was like jeans, t-shirt, leather jacket, leather biker jacket, for frack's sake. I mean, with a like super short, like blue or green or orange hair, total dyke. And I'm hanging out with these like super, you know, fashionable ravers wearing their like Adidas and their Echo. But nobody gave a shit. Yeah, it just felt a lot less judgy. And so it also kind of made me mellow out a little bit too. There really was something to be said for like the kindness part of it. Being a hardcore asshole, I mean, unless you were in, you know, Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, that was the cultural cachet there. But I like the whole, like, just, for lack of a better word, the whole blur thing, which we always thought was hilarious. I hated that word, but like, I liked the idea of it. You know, the peace, the love, unity, respect. The concepts were good. Even if you thought it was over the top or cheesy, it was still like, these are okay ideals to strive for. You know, I like this. It was just a little bit more, for lack of a better word, kind of hippie. I remember being like a punk kid and I saw stuff about like the Grateful Dead and people who traveled to see the band. And I thought, wow, that sounds like an awesome culture. And then I heard the Grateful Dead and I was like, nope.
Same.
Nope. Sorry. And no diss if you love the Grateful Dead. This is just me saying the Grateful Dead is not for me. I was looking for a culture like that was a little bit more inclusive and that was a little bit more sort of, you know, come together and just be cool. You got to give some props to like San Francisco Underground and the Grateful Dead. Kind of that whole psychedelic thing is really the precursor of rave. So I just didn't like the music as much. So now I had music I liked with the whole, like, you know, psychedelic, chill family culture. Oh, one thing I loved is that, let's say you're dancing and you accidentally step on somebody's toe. You don't just ignore it. You turn around and you apologize. And then the other person's like, no, it's okay. Hey, do you want to go get a smart drink? And that's how you met a friend. You know, I had somebody who stepped on my toe and I was like, oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. And then like 10 minutes later, they came back and they had bought me a soda pop. Just as a, hey, sorry. And I was like, oh, you didn't have to do that, but that's awesome. What's your name? Where are you from? Oh, let me get out my planner. Let's call each other. So it's such a Midwest thing. We all had our planners, your little binder, and you would put your little business cards that you got from DJs and promoters in it, and you would sticker it. And everybody's name was like what their name was and where they were from or what party you met them at. You never knew anybody's last name. It would be like Vivian, Starshine 2, you know, or like whatever party it was. Yeah, everybody was in there under a name like that. It was pretty hilarious.
I know this because I've read quite a bit about you, but it happened in my life too, where at some point the bus became more prominent than the raves. Like there were more bus than raves that were allowed to like go on. When did that start happening for you? And, you know, like how did you feel at that time about like, you know, you're deeply invested in this culture. You're playing every weekend. It's like a not insignificant amount of money also, even though it's like 200 here and 500 here, but that's still like you have a part-time job and you can make it work. I mean, how did this whole thing feel to you, and when did you start seeing that kind of happening for you?
Like I was telling you about that Trans-Europe Express book, I had read about the UK's legislation that criminalized like the sound system culture and proper raves in a field with a sound system. And I remember thinking, this will happen here, but because of how our country is situated, it'll happen city by city. So Chicago was obviously the big one that, you know, we knew there was always going to be a risk of a bust. And then St. Louis, there was always a bust there because they had the Superstars of Love parties were huge, but usually got busted. We had them off and on. Around 2000, 2001, I think. 2001 was one of the bigger busts that happened here. Although sometimes, man, busts are funny. That was the one that kind of shut down the city for us, though. Like, we'd always had busts. There was a party called Monkey Madness, where basically everybody was on acid. It was a big Detroit DJ party. And so it was only right that there was acid. But they busted it. And I remember thinking, but you know where we are. Like, this is the stupid part about the bust part. Okay, you know a bunch of kids are on acid. You've already kind of gathered this. Why not just let them stay here? And they'll just dance. And then by the time they're done dancing, they'll be sober. Instead, what they did was bust the party and send all those tripping motherfuckers out to drive around the city. I might have been one of them. It was very confusing. I was like, you don't want to do that. Just leave them there. They're harmless. Just, ugh. But yeah, the one in 2001 really kind of sealed the deal. I believe it was after Disco Donnie in New Orleans and the big bust down there that really made the news. So we kind of saw it coming. There's actually a really well-known DJ from here. It used to go by Cyberjive, now John Larner, who was down there at the time. He was working with Disco Donnie, and he actually owns a club up here now. But so we kind of got the word on how that had gone down from him. Like there was the official story that you read in like, you know, Mix Mag or whatever. And then there was like hearing it from one of the sources. So I was like, it's happening. It's spreading. And then I started to read about how like the DEA was giving money to local law enforcement offices specifically to go after raves. So I was like the Cassandra of the situation. Like, y'all, this is going to start happening if we don't get our shit together. And by that, I mean, we're going to have to do some legal stuff and figure out how to do this right. And then we're also going to figure out how to fight when they bust us anyway. And we're going to have to figure out how to talk to the city government and try and come to some form of agreement here. Nobody wanted to listen to that. So then they really started busting us. Like, they busted a party. The mayor did like a press conference the next day. You know, he issued a mandate that off-duty police officers couldn't work security at raves, which, you know, were so illegitimate that the cops don't know. These were quotes, that the cops don't know where the parties are until the day of. Oh, except for the fact that we're hiring off-duty cops to be security. You know, whatever happened to equal protection under the law? You're accusing us of being big drug dens, but you're taking away our only avenue to deal with it. You know, we weren't asking cops to bust people. Normally, they would just not let them in. We tried to kind of meet with the city government. Well, some people did. I kind of got iced out of the whole thing, which I still might be salty about. because I was the only one who actually knew anything about how government works. So make sure I'm not there. Their efforts didn't work, and so it was just a wasteland for years. And yeah, for me as a DJ, not being able to play, what do you do at that particular juncture? And I mean, part of it sucked because, yeah, oh shit, I actually need a full-time job now. But part of it was just like, my whole culture is dissolving in front of my face. And that really sucked. And then it started pushing into clubs, and I would go to clubs, and I don't like clubs really. Not in the States anyway. They're different in other places, but I don't like being around drunk people. And I'd rather be around people tripping, rolling their balls on E, smoking tons of weed. I'm cool with that. Don't like cokeheads, and I don't like alcohol, except for the occasional beer. And clubs wanted music that, frat boys would come listen to and try and pick up chicks. And banging techno ain't it, So it really started to limit the genres that would get booked. So yeah, so the techno people and the drum and bass people were just left out in the cold. Like the house DJs could get gigs, nobody else could. 2001 was really when it started to go down the shitter. It was hard. It sucked. I ended up with a full-time job, though, through one of the old promoters that I used to play for, who ran a printing company, a design and printing company. So my rave culture still kept me alive, even when the DJing wasn't happening, because those connections from people through rave culture, those have lasted. I do IT stuff, and I've had people send me jobs. That culture has embedded itself deeper than, just parties and music.
The rave scene stopped, so you stop playing every weekend and you get a full-time job. But at what point do things start creeping back in and you kind of see an uptick again in the DJ gigs or production or anything like that?
It took a hot minute for me because I started learning how to produce during that time. I remember, I think my first record came out in 2004. I ended up having to sell my turntables because I was so broke. So I didn't have anything to play on at home. So I just started learning, Reason. But I never had a computer. So I finally had a computer at my house and started learning how to produce. I was like, whatever, I got nothing else to do. So I started to do it, and it was fun. And I got a few records out. And then techno kind of took a big dump around 2005. Hard techno had worn itself out, and the leaky sink techno came in, which I did not like and would not play. No, that's more like minus era. 2006 dubstep happened, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna jump into this massive black hole of goodness. The DJing started to pick up because of dubstep. I was playing some techno in with the dubstep just because I thought they were fun together. But it really didn't pick back up for me until more like 2008, maybe. It was pretty dead for almost a decade, where I was just kind of doing it wherever. Maybe a house party. Maybe I just play dubstep at some bar somewhere. But yeah, it took almost a decade for things to really pick back up for me.
And then what happened?
Techno started getting good again. Also, I had kind of, diversified my interest. Dubstep was fun because it was the first genre I was kind of at the ground floor of. I produced dubstep. It wasn't dubstep. It was this crazy mishmash of dubstep and electro, whatever. But I kind of learned some things about what I like about music, and kind of carried that through with me. It changed how I DJ'd. It made me listen to different things. So it was a nice little diversion. Plus, oh my God, I love bass. And then, techno started to kind of get interesting again. It came out of the uber coolish era, I would say. Less V-necks, less coke.
It felt to me like, and this is jumping forward from 2008, but something happened at Chicago's Smart Bar. There started being like focused or more curated nights, and DJs were coming overseas. People started to pay attention again to DJs from the Midwest. I mean, globally started to pay attention. All of a sudden, there was an interest in talking about the history of Chicago house and Detroit techno again. People were interested in American house and techno. And it felt to me like that was connected in some way to what was going on at Smart Bar.
I was kind of late on the uptake for Smart Bar because Chicago was a place that took me a really long time to get into. You really had to know somebody there. So that was one of the hardest ones to get into. But yeah, I mean, you're right about the curated nights. And these were people who really knew the genres. I don't know what necessarily, brought it about. But one thing I noticed is like Berghain and people like, you'd have Ben Klock and Marcel Detman, who are like, obviously pretty core to that whole situation. I would see track lists from Ben, and there's like these old ass Chicago records. Even if you were buying records all through the 90s, there's stuff you missed. And now sometimes you can get like re-releases, or, somebody really releases their whole catalog on Bandcamp. I liked record shopping, but that's pretty rad. It's nice to have that back. And I think that also helped drive the uptick in interest, because you started to be able to hear these producers who maybe were, known here, but not around the world.
This whole time we've been talking about your DJ career, most of that career was done under the name DJ Shiva, but probably people who know you now know you as Noncompliant. When did you start that project, and what was the name change about?
So it happened around 2016. I wanted to do a project. Noncompliant comes from the comic Bitch Planet. And Noncompliant is basically a reference to women who don't conform to expected gender norms, which, hello. Yeah, definitely I do not. But I also wanted to do something that was more explicitly feminist. Like, I mean, I don't think you have to talk to me for more than 3 seconds to figure out that I'm a feminist. But to try and find a way to put that in my music was a new thing. You can concept all day long in techno. Nobody gives a shit what your concept is on the dance floor. Do your tracks bang? Awesome. But I still wanted a way to sort of inject some of that philosophically into the music. There's a little bit of a fuck you for various reasons. Because I was sick of people telling me, oh, well, we're not sexist. We book 100% on talent, not gender. I'm like, then your party should never be 100% dudes. If that's the case, you're lying, and you don't even realize you're lying. I don't think it's intentional, but you just don't realize that you've just accepted 100% male as the default. And I had a promoter who I'd known for years, who knew I played techno, who had seen me play techno. I asked him why they didn't have more women at their events, and he said, we just can't find women who play the sort of music we like. And I was like, have we met? I was so shocked. I literally couldn't even say anything. But then also, like, it was meant to be a side project because, techno has lots of pseudonyms, and I love that techno has pseudonyms. So it was only meant to be a pseudonym. And then, like, there were a few reasons, and I don't like to talk about it in some ways because this is not me trying to get, like, performative activist points. So I don't really talk about the other thing, which was I started to realize how awkward it is for a white girl to have the name DJ Shiva. Nobody's ever gotten mad at me for it or said anything or said they were offended. In fact, most people I've met who are of Indian descent were like, oh, that's awesome. But I still felt it was like I had learned that, like, oh, this is a thing I didn't know back then. And now it's a thing that maybe I could just do Noncompliant full time. That was also utterly terrifying because I had been DJ Shiva for 20 years. And I was like, is this a smart move, or am I literally torpedoing every bit of work I've done for the last 20 years? But I decided in favor of it just because I was like, you have learned something new that you didn't know then, and be responsible and do the right thing. And finally, like, I got booked at Panorama Bar, and I was like, holy shit. And I was like, should I do it now? Because if you're going to do this, why not debut it at Panorama Bar? I may be a punk rock kid, but I'm not stupid. Like, if you want to like launch this name, that's a way to do it. And maybe you won't lose your ass on it. And then it ended up being probably the best thing I ever did. But I couldn't know it back then. I was terrified. And Noncompliant is the most techno fucking name ever. It kind of works.
Always thought like, okay, Shiva's the destroyer. Not that that's not a strong name, but Noncompliant has, it's sort of like underground resistance. Like it has this idea of resistance built into it.
Yeah.
And now is like a time where you can, because of the tools at our disposal, like social media and whatever, but also just because of the time we're living in, where you can talk about politics and feminism and DJing and making music in the same breath, and you can reach people with that. People were less accepting of this explicit connection between the political and the personal back in 1995 as they are now.
Well, and the wild thing too is 2016 changed a lot of things with, the election of Trump. So like if there was ever a time to become non-compliant, it just felt like that was the time. Things were going real sideways even before that election. And I knew then that we had a real hard time ahead of us. We can't really know the future, but I knew if that guy won, we were going to be screwed for a while. And I wasn't wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a name. My name isn't as relevant as whether I have anything worthwhile to say. But I think we did need some non-compliance. We had some of the largest protests in our country's history because of that motherfucker. People showed up at airports to protest the Muslim ban. In cities everywhere, in Indianapolis, which is notorious for it being kind of hard to get people to actually show up for any kind of direct action. People think of like Alabama and Mississippi as the worst racist countries. Indiana was the home of the KKK in the early 20th century. Like the state still has sundown towns where if black people are out after dark, they're going to get attacked. So it's a pretty racist state. So for that to happen, for people to show up and support Muslim people, that was a big deal. But people did get pretty non-compliant. I was pretty stoked.
We had the election of Trump and his presidency, which is insane. And then we also got hit with COVID-19. And this has been another huge blow to humanity and also to live music and the DJ scene. I wanted to ask you about it because I was reflecting on, you've been DJing and producing and been in this culture for 20 plus years, 25 plus years. And we've seen it go up and down a lot. And what I see is a lot of DJs and a lot of people that have really fallen in love with the club scene and electronic music and all that. And this is sort of their first go round of an event where there suddenly are no gigs and no clubs and no money. I would just want to get some of your perspective and some of your advice that you would give to people that are experiencing that are much younger.
US DJs have always had to have jobs. The only way you were going to do this full time most of the time was just moving to Europe, which a lot of people did. I think that's a weird advantage in this whole situation. Is that was my first instinct. Like, gotta get a job. I'd been working up until mid 2019, so I got almost a full year of just full time DJing in. But I was just like, I guess I go back to work. Dude, it sucked. I mean, I needed jobs that I could work from home, so I did crappy sales jobs. Yeah, it's not my first downswing, but it is my first pandemic. It's hard. It's really hard. For the first 6 months, I was like, we're going to be so productive. No, we're not. Well, some people were able to just write it out and do shit tons of music writing, and I applaud them. I have no idea how they did it because I was just like, I'm just going to sit here on the couch with my crippling depression. And I live alone with a cat, so I was very isolated. Isolation does wacky things to your brain. What's interesting now is pictures they did that rave in Liverpool where it was everybody had to be tested, everybody had to be monitored. They're supposed to take tests afterwards, but it was 3,000 people, and I was like, ew. The thought of that freaks me out entirely right now. You know, there's a lot of people who just want to get right back to it right now. And I'm like, get back to normal. What is normal? Nothing's normal anymore. We're past normal. You know, we're post normal. Okay. Like, this isn't going to be normal in the way that you knew it before. I went to school. You know, I got some IT certifications and was like, well, you know, if I'm in a position where I'm just going to have to do a day job again, then I might as well be able to get a better day job. It sucks. I hate trying to get jobs. I'm not a fan of capitalism. But also just trying to think about, what does this mean? How do we do this again? I'll be the one to say that I don't think jumping right into 3,000, 6,000 people parties is really the way to go.
What I think is interesting is, like, as a DJ, you are relatively safe because you're behind a barrier. You're probably only interacting with the staff and like whoever else is playing. So that's maybe like 10 people or something. And you can control who's on the stage with you. So if you're freaked out, you could be like, nobody can be on the stage with me. Nobody can touch me. And you can control it. And you're probably not going to get COVID. But I guess you being there is like tacitly supporting all of these 3,000 people with no mask.
I will say this. There is one big difference in the UK that a lot of places, including the US, don't have. And that is that the NHS tests. Like, you had to be tested to get a ticket. You could only buy one ticket. You could not buy a ticket for anybody else. And you had to be from Liverpool. You couldn't be somebody who traveled to that party either. So I think that's really important because the traveling also spreads. But the thing is, if you get your little test, it has a QR code and your results get logged into your NHS account, which I actually think is a great idea. I just don't understand why it had to be 3,000 people. I mean, I know having a big sample base is critical to statistically, but with a disease that has exponential growth, you've got to make it smaller. I've been reading epidemiology books for a long time, just out of my own personal curiosity, because I thought for the last decade we were overdue for a pandemic. I mean, basically every epidemiologist would tell you the same thing. So I've been reading about this stuff because I'm a nerd. I just didn't think I'd have to live through one.
You're somebody that loves sci-fi, and we've seen the COVID-19 thing really speed up the use of stuff like QR codes and all these technologies that people wanted to implement, but they were like, are people really going to go for this? And then it was like, boom, everybody just went for like the QR code menu and all of these various things. And I think it's pretty interesting having your life as like a club goer and a ticket buyer, coupled with your medical history and your medical results. And it's kind of dystopian future vibes to be like, okay, well, to get into this festival, you know, what's stopping them from being like, you have to have no pre-existing conditions?
Don't even get me started, man. I mean, what I've been studying also is cybersecurity. So the security implications of your personal health information and your personally identifiable information being in more places, it comes with its own set of dangers. Because right now, like, personal health information is one of the things that fetches the most money when it comes to hackers. They love getting their hands on that shit. It's that double-edged sword, you know? It's like, it really is useful to be able to track, to contact trace. When they used phone records to figure out how like stuff spread from like spring break, you know, they used phone data to show where people went afterwards. It's really fucking creepy that they can do that. And yet it showed us a data set that was critical to understanding the exponential spread of a deadly disease. So it's frustrating. And the sad thing is, it kind of feeds into some of the crazier conspiracy theories. Like, there is this grain of truth in some of these conspiracy theories. Well, what cracks me up is, like, you know, if you get a vaccine, they're tracking you with a vaccine. It's like, dog, they're tracking you with this. This is a phone. You have a tracker in your pocket every day, and you're worried about a vaccine. Technology is awesome and absolutely awful all at the same time. For years, I wouldn't even give people my real name in an interview, like for DJing. It was just like, you just knew DJ Shiva. That was it. I might tell you my first name, but I wanted to tell you my last name. And that's because after the big rave busts, I was quoted in a big front page story in the Indianapolis Star, and my phone was tapped. And people might say, "You're paranoid." Yes, I am. I also know what it sounds like when your phone's getting tapped.
What does it sound like?
It's a click. It's a clicking on the line. It's a very distinct click. And so, like, what was hilarious is I was just like, "Dogs, I'm a DJ, man. I don't deal drugs. I'm not some, like, crazy moneymaker. I'm just a po-ass DJ." So I would just start talking shit the whole time. When my phone started clicking, I just started talking shit. There are reasons to be paranoid. Literally everything is hacked. This is not paranoia. This is, the NSA has got its deep claws into everything. And so does China, and so does Russia. Like, basically, if your shit's on the internet, something's hacked somewhere. Then you have the question of, like, COVID passports. What do you do when something spreads exponentially and people aren't taking the precautions? There are people who've got on the flights knowing damn good and well they had COVID. And then if you do COVID passports, well, then people are going to get fake ones. There's already people trying to buy fake vaccine cards. It is scary to give governments more power because you're in a scary situation. I also know that millions of people are dead.
I think one thing that a lot of people are talking about is what they would like to see when the scene comes back, and maybe some wrongs that they would like to see righted, or some things that were kind of going off the rails, whether that be, party size, DJ fees, diversity in lineups, whatever the case may be. Like, what they would like to, this is a chance to bring it back in a way that, be the club you want to see in the world or whatever. So be the DJ you want to see in the world or whatever. So what for
God,
you?
That's a big question.
What are some things, and this doesn't have to be everything, but what are some things that you would like to see electronic music, dance culture, club culture do when it comes back?
So a little precursor, and then when it comes back. The precursor, I have to reference Plague DJs again. Because whether you're a big name making shit tons of money, like 5 figures, or you're just somebody making $500 playing at a club or whatever, you need to ask yourself. I said this the other day with somebody. We were talking about how a lot of people really shown their ass. People who would play events, well, it's legal to do it there. Well, that doesn't make it right. Just because it's legal doesn't mean you're not going to, pull people into a place where they could get infected and pass it on to their community. So the question is, are we a scene or are we a community? Are we just a scene where we randomly go to different events and we see DJs and that's all there is to it? We all do the same thing, therefore it's a scene? Or are we a community where we actually care about the people around us? And we care about protecting, not only ourselves, but everyone. Like, when Ghost Ship happened, I remember having these conversations like every damn one of us in the Midwest has played a party that we know damn good and well that venue was not safe. We did it tons of times and we just got lucky. That's all it was. It was just luck. So we started to talk about the fact that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility as artists. We have a responsibility as promoters to make sure the people who come to our events, be they DJs or, just regular old ravers, that they're safe. And that includes, making sure that women aren't being stalked and pawed. And it means that making sure your venue is safe and not a fire trap. And it means that making sure you're not packing a bunch of people into a venue in the middle of a goddamn pandemic. And that extends into how we move forward from here. It really fucking sucks when, especially, I know a lot of these folks, especially in Europe, it's literally been their careers for decades. If you've been doing this for 20 years and you've never actually had a proper job, holy shit, that's gotta be weird. I think coming back into it, we have to recognize we're not the only ones. There's whole restaurants that have gone under. There's clubs that have gone under. There's people who had just started their own business and never got it off the ground. There's a lot of people who got laid off their jobs who are never going to be able to find a decent job again because they're older and they're too young to retire. We're not the only ones who got hurt here. People lost loved ones. What I would like to see happen, that I doubt will happen, is some of these people making the ridiculous amounts of money. I hate to break it to you, but there's just less fucking money. Like if you're asking like 500 grand for a fucking gig, like get the fuck out of here with that. We have to rebuild. And sometimes that means sucking up your fucking ego and taking a little less to help, people be able to do events again. That's just the way it is. That's how I had to do it. For a long time, it was just like, $50 in gas money. Cool, we're good. Because there was nothing and nobody had any money. I used to do a thing where I had a sliding scale. How much are you charging at the door? Because that's really going to be the thing that tells me how much to charge you. What's your capacity? Because especially in smaller towns, we know what the general attendance is. In Indy, you're not getting more than 50 or 60 people. At a techno party, you're just not. Sorry.
And for our next podcast, we will be doing Noncompliant and Star Eyes Talk Club Economics 101. I'm only half kidding.
I think we're going to see more hopefully smaller regional events. I hope. It's going to be harder because there are less venues. So we're going to have to get creative. I just think smaller and cozier and friendlier.
So how old were you when you started throwing raves or going to raves? And also, how old were you when you played at Berghain or when Noncompliant started up?
So I started going to raves, the little ones that we were doing. Let's see, that was 92, 93. So I was about 20, 21. And I started DJing when I was 25. Wait, 95. 23. The first time I ever went to Europe was September of 2016. Panorama Bar was my first gig that I got overseas after that. And that was April 16th, 2017. My birthday is April 18th. And I turned 45. I just never quit, basically. I just kept going. 2015 and 2016 were the worst years I'd had in like a decade. I couldn't pay somebody to book me in the Midwest or in my hometown. Beginning of 2016, I'm like, I'm going to save up a bunch of money, buy myself a ticket to Berlin, try and get a gig or two. I'd never got to go to Europe, and that's all I wanted to do was go to Europe. I said, if I play there, they'll get it. The Detroit techno militia guys, Tom Linder, told me, buy a ticket, tell them you're going to be there, get a gig. Just get your ass over there so somebody can hear you.
You played for Room for Resistance, which is a party that is geared towards and promoting women and non-binary DJs and very supportive of LGBTQ DJs in a scene that, like many scenes all over the world, can sometimes be super stratified. Even in recent times, Berlin had kind of not had that many spaces for anybody on the LGBTQ spectrum that was not like gay man, and especially like white gay man. Did you have any spaces like this growing up as like a butch lesbian? Did you have anywhere, did the rave have any connection to your sexual identity, or was that a safe space for you?
No, I didn't have anything like that. So here's the thing with me. At no place did I really feel like I really had space. Like the gay clubs here were kind of mixed crowds, but they played horrible music. Although I did play drum and bass at a janky lesbian club once. It was hilarious. So yeah, I never had a place where I could kind of have both those things. And to be honest, I still don't. I mean, well, there's no lesbian bars left hardly in this country. But especially as a lesbian, there just weren't places that you could go where this music was coupled with just being around queer women. That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted. And it just wasn't a thing. I was pretty out from the time I moved up here to Indy. I felt pretty okay. I'm like a giant gay beacon. Oh, there's the lesbian. Yeah. But I never felt like I was just in a space with my people. And I think probably the only time I ever really felt that way was at Room for Resistance, to be honest. That's why I was so stoked that, like, I only got one gig on that trip, but it was the absolute perfect gig. It was what I wanted. And it was at the Garden in About Blank, which is so beautiful. And it was a beautiful day. There's just all these awesome people. And I had so many fantastic conversations too. Like, not only did we get to dance, but like we got into some freaking great conversations about like activism and like dealing with racism, just everything. We were having like really deep, interesting conversations with a great soundtrack and, some beer. And it was just fucking perfect. I did get to play for some folks in Australia, in both Sydney and Melbourne. And that was awesome. And like awesome queer ladies in charge of it. God, that was fun. I had a great time in Australia, but that's still like an elusive thing for me. It's always been a thing that with queer women, you can't keep clubs open because they all go to the club to meet a girlfriend and then they U-Haul and then they're in a relationship for 6 months and they don't go anywhere because they nest. And then when they break up, they go back to the clubs to find a girlfriend and then rinse and repeat ad infinitum ad nauseum. The stereotype is so true. But which is why I'm still single, because I'm like, I still want to go party. I want to come home from the party and like read a book with a cat on my chest. So I'm like split down the middle of like stereotypical indigo girls listening, lesbian with a cat and lots of tea and books. And then on the other hand, I want to go like skateboard and, play at raves.
Well, it's a new generation. There should be some people out there that are down with that. Anyway, Lisa, thank you so much for joining me here on Rave to the Grave. It was a real pleasure and an honor. And I hope we get part 2 one day.
Yes, let's do it. The economics of raves.
Until next time, Lisa, thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was fun.
Rave to the Grave is recorded at the Newsstand Studios at Rockefeller Center in New York City. This podcast has been produced and hosted by me, Vivian Host. Our engineer is superstar Joe Hazen. All the music you hear in this episode is made by Noncompliant. If you want to hear more, check out her SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/noncompliant and then the number 1. Make sure to check out our other episodes of Rave to the Grave on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like Rave to the Grave, make sure to leave us a rating or a comment. We actually love it a lot. For more extras and fun, you can check us out on the web at ravetothegrave.org or on Instagram at ravetothe.grave. Until next time, party on, party people.